In this room, we have over some years of bike industry experience, and we are here to talk about the good things that we like about it and the bad things that we're not so sure on. I am joined by Rob Weaver, Senior Technical Editor-in-Chief. Or have I added a word?
You just added the senior because I'm old, right? I mean,
yeah.
Rob has about 50.
We're here with senior citizen Rob Weaver, Technical Editor-in-Chief.
50 years of experience, and Simon von Romley, who has, 5?
Yeah, I literally just walked in the door 5 minutes ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gents, thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to throw to Rob.
Ooh.
You are the experienced hand in the room. What do you like? No, actually, It's YouTube. We've got to lead with a negative. What do you not like about the cycling industry?
Okay, I'm going to go with standards first.
Yes.
Just because sometimes you're working on a bike and you are maybe swapping parts and you think what could be a 5-10 minute job turns into an insanely drawn out, head banging against wall rigmarole.
Yeah.
Tom Marvin being a prime example of someone who despises the change in standards. Now, I'm all for changes that improve performance on the bike, things like that. But sometimes it does feel we have gone through a few spats of changes for the sake of changes. Maybe they could prove a small sort of percentage increase in this, that, the other. But I don't think many people necessarily notice.
Do you want to throw some shade at a certain brand or a certain standard that you really hate?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think for me, one thing I would say, axle standards.
Okay.
I think we're in a pretty good place now. There's still the odd brand here and there that will use something slightly different. Maybe they'll bring in a sort of a downhill standard onto a trail bike, which I don't necessarily think is completely necessary. They have their reasoning for it, but when I want to swap my wheels, which is obviously the most important thing,
yes, and
then I find out I can't, and then I have to try to source some new ones. Oh my lord, what a hard life I have.
On the axle standards, I think the roadside has actually been, I mean, you guys at home might agree, it's quite settled.
Well, that's the thing, we are.
Years.
It is fairly settled, but it will just be these occasional brands that will just say, actually, we'll just do this. This will make the rear end of the bike better.
Will it?
Yeah.
I think axle standards on the road have definitely improved in the last few years, and I think it kind of came out of that whole the bottom bracket wars of the kind of 2000s to 2010, when every single brand wanted to reinvent the bottom bracket, come up with a new axle that was stiffer, lighter, blah blah blah, and now we've kind of settled on 24mm spindles from Shimano and Campagnolo, I believe, and then also you've got your kind of BB30 30mm spindles. Obviously, SRAM loves to have its 29 point whatever dub axle. That's fine, they can have it. It's close enough that we'll just say, well, it's roughly 30mm, and that's not, obviously, as long as you're using the right bottom bracket, that's fine. I think this is a really interesting one that is now rearing its head with the rise of integrated front ends, for example. There's no agreed standard for an integrated front end.
But I think there are kind of available systems to a lot of brands with Vision. Is it Vision's DCR or
so Vision have ACR, FCR. They've got about 3 different versions of their own standard, which is fine. I think they're kind of all vaguely intercompatible. But then Data has their own one as well. There are a number of third-party component brands that make standards for these things, but of course we're also in the era where every big brand, Specialized, Trek, Giant, they all want to do it in-house. And so they have their own systems because they want to spec their own, Roval, Bontrager, whatever components that kind of go on the front end. Talking of Tom Marvin, he wrote a really interesting, a funny piece as well. It is interesting, called "Dear Bike Industry, These Are the Only Mountain Bike Standards You Should Use." He wrote this back in 2020. It would be really funny to get him to revisit that and to see if the ones that he chose back then are still the same. If you want to go read that, we'll put a link in the video description below. It's a good read.
What I would ask on the roadside, how easy is it to make an upgrade to the bike if they've got an integrated front end?
It depends. It really depends.
Because it feels like cycling as a whole everyone loves to upgrade stuff, right? It's that sort of thing that everyone seems to enjoy doing, those small incremental improvements through tech or whatever it might be, or just, someone buys you something nice for Christmas, nice component you've had on the wish list for years, but then you can't fit it because there's some kind of proprietary standard or part.
It really depends on your bike. If you have a bike with a kind of a really integrated front end, then it's probably really expensive for a start, but then that's going to reduce your ability to upgrade it, which you might not want to if you've already spent 10 grand on a bike and it's already got the kind of same handlebar they're using at the Tour de France, and maybe it's not really a problem. But yeah, like if you have a cheaper bike with a less integrated front end, it still uses like a round handlebar or like a standard stem, you have a little bit more scope. But often you have to, if you've got a bike which has cable routing through the upper headset bearing, that like top headset spacer which routes the cables through often is designed to kind of like look clean with the specific stem that the brand has spec'd on the bike. And so maybe you could put a different stem on it, but it might not look amazing, and it's kind of tricky. Like I think in the bike industry's defense, I think the bike industry has more open standards than something like the car industry. But obviously bikes are inherently simpler. So it's kind of tricky.
I would also say, sorry Rob, that there is a significant sizing issue with some brands. Now, I want to shout out to Bianchi here, because I used their Specialissima RC, and in writing that review, contacted Bianchi and said, look, this cockpit system is fully integrated, but it's not the right size for me. If I was buying this bike, what options do I have at the point of purchase to change it? And they came back to me with, yes, you can change it. I think it was for free. But also, here is the list of 17 sizes that we do. And that ain't cheap for them. Like, that is, 17 molds, I would imagine. And you can contrast that to something like Specialized with the SL8. Roval's Rapide bar is not available in too many sizes, especially if you're more of a racer or you're looking to emulate the pros and fit like a 130 stem with a 38 centimeter bar width. You can't get it.
Yeah, it's often those things on like the kind of like the extremes. If you want something short and wide, or long and narrow.
I can't believe you can buy 130mm stem.
Yeah, you can, mate.
Oh mate, that's not.
Have you never? I mean, again, another classic BikeRadar article is like the longest stem we've ever seen. I think we published an article on some Australian guy who was using like a 200mm stem or something like that. It must have been. It was at least 180mm. Again, I'll pop a little link in the video description below. And if you've seen a longer stem out there, do send it to us, because we want to know about it.
Jonas Rutsch always turns up to a new season with like a 170, and 3T make these things still. You can buy them.
I mean,
great. Would you have one of those on your bike, Rob?
No, I wouldn't. I'd maybe use one for bridging a stream.
Bridging a stream. 190mm is the longest stem we've ever seen. So yeah, if anyone out there has seen a stem longer than 190mm, do let us know. We'd love to know, because we can update our record book.
#stem spotting.
So standards in the bike industry are an easy one for us to get very, very annoyed by.
They are getting better.
I love that. I haven't seen a BB30 bottom bracket PF30A in a while. 24mm threaded seems like a very sensible system. But Simon, we're not negative here. I'd like a positive from you, if at all possible.
Yeah, I can give you that. I think one of the best things about being in the bike industry is that like everyone you meet is really into bikes. And I think there's a kind of like, sometimes there's a kind of perception that the people who work for bike brands are just kind of like, a little bit like you get with the media or whatever, like it's kind of faceless monoliths full of people who are just out to make, profit, and they don't care about everyday riders. But everyone that I've met, having only been in the bike industry for like, 4 or 5 years, to be fair, but everyone that I've met is genuinely really into bikes.
Completely agree. I think on that, of course, there are people making money at the top, probably wear suits, probably love a spreadsheet. But the people that we deal with, definitely marketing, engineers, product managers, all of those people are genuinely all super passionate about bikes and are there to either market those bikes that they love or design, build, manufacture those bikes that they love. None of them are millionaires. None of them are going to be millionaires if they continue to work in the bike industry, as I can vouch for, having worked in it for some time. But they love it. They're so passionate about it. And when they're tasked with making the next thing, it isn't making the next thing in order to ensure that that company makes another $1 million or $10 million the following year. It's they just want to improve on what they're currently doing. They're always there just trying to search it out, a little bit like pro riders just looking for those incremental improvements. It's sort of no different to that. Yes, of course there is a business behind it at the end of the day, but those people are so passionate and they're so cool. It's so nice to spend time with them. Anytime I've had the opportunity, we did some stuff with Fox Suspension years ago when they were just launching their downhill fork with an air spring, so the Fox 40, the first time it had an air spring. And I got to spend a week with the engineers and we were just doing timed downhill runs, and they would bend over backwards to do anything possible to make that fork and allow you to ride as fast as possible. With the athletes, with all the media people that were there, it was just, you could just see how into it they were, working insane hours, and not for the money but for the fact that they know that they can just push the performance as much as they possibly can. It's all driven by that, it's always so nice to see.
And I think another, on a separate point, one that you've written down, and this I think is mountain bike specific, is that a lot of the brands are kind of quite keen actually to take feedback on board and actually make the product better for next time, both from customers but also from yourself. You've got quite a good example of that.
Yeah, I think you're talking about my moany messages when every time I had a flat tyre, I'd send it back to this bike brand. So that was for Nuke Proof, RIP.
Hopefully to be revived.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, so they'd put a bike in for Enduro Bike of the Year, and part of the sales pitch was, that this bike is, you can just take it off the shop floor and it's ready to race. But as I kind of was alluding to, though, I continue to get flat tyres because the tyres on there were there to basically create this sort of headline weight to make the bike appear and feel lighter. Although, as soon as you start to push it, you just destroy the tyres super quick. So every time I got a flat tyre on that bike whilst testing, I would send it to the marketing manager, and he would then, apologise. And eventually, the following year, they spec'd much better tyres from the bottom of the range through to the top. So every single bike in that lineup had identical tyres that you could, in fact, go out and ride and race on without having to change them at point of sale. So I'm sure I wasn't the only one feeding that stuff back. I wouldn't take the credit for that by any stretch, and I'm sure the product managers probably would have flagged it early on. But to not just be, criticised and hounded for when you kind of send those messages. And obviously it helped that I had a good relationship with the marketing manager. But yeah, it's always really refreshing when those people are able to just take on that feedback and they take it on the chin, or they'll come back with some pertinent questions or ask for a call on a meeting, and you can discuss that stuff more openly. I'm not totally sure that's the same in the
I was going to say, Simon, is that the same that you've experienced on the road?
I mean, obviously, you always remember the kind of the bad experiences more than positive ones, and I think on the tyre thing, it's kind of interesting you raised that, because that's something that a lot of, I say not a lot, but some road bike brands do with tyres as well, spec-in tyres that are really light in order to kind of reduce the weight and then get that headline weight figure down really low. I think the Specialissima, for example, had Pirelli TT tyres, if I'm not mistaken.
Did, and I was
in a 25 mil.
Yeah, in a 25, and in I think they were set up clincher, and I was reviewing it on quite wet roads, and I had a lot of scary moments.
So that's fun. And Canyon did it with their kind of ultimate CFR. They spec'd Shorby Pro 1 TT tires.
That was a 25 on the front.
And also,
well.
a 25 on the front, and it helped save that kind of last 200 grams or whatever. And they're rideable, those tires, but like as you say, like you take them out on a wet day in the back lanes around here, like you're going to be getting punctures. I think in terms of like brands listening to feedback, I obviously I'm sure that there are plenty of brands that, you know, if I give feedback on a product, you know, if they even read it, maybe they do, and they'll take it on the chin. I have had a few instances where like certain brands have kind of got in touch, you know, feeling that they were slightly hard done by some of my reviews, but like it's kind of tricky. I think maybe it comes back to the fact that they are so passionate about the product that a lot of people really believe in what they've done. You know, obviously, like there have also been times when I've got it wrong, and you know that's absolutely fine. Like you know, if a brand wants to get in touch with me and say, oh, you know, we feel that you've got this wrong, for example. Like I remember when I was like, maybe I was testing a power meter or something, like they were saying some brand got in touch with me to say, oh, actually, you know, you're doing the zero offset process wrong. So then I had to go back and retest it. That's fair enough. Like you know, no problem with that. But yeah, I have had a couple of back and forths with certain brands where it's kind of like they haven't been so keen on the feedback.
I think the first week I started in the office, I had to go sit in a conference call with a really, really big brand that's actually slightly outside of our usual remit, basically just to be shouted at because they were really unhappy with the review. They'd made some crap shoes ultimately and were selling them for a lot of money.
Tangent. I was looking at real speedy running shoes the other day, which I have been advised not to get because apparently I'm not fast enough, and that crushed me. But the most expensive running shoes from like Nike are 285 quid, and I'm just looking at them and going, cycling industry can beat you there, mate. Like 350.
Well, don't give them any ideas, Liam. Yeah. Nike marketing manager, if they're watching this, be raising their prices as they speak. So you should have brought those shoes already before you said that.
Are they the ones that make you run a marathon in less than 2 hours?
I hope so.
Good.
I really hope so. I want to continue.
And just like in cycling, it all works, doesn't it? Just as advertised.
Yeah. My brother is in kind of a gym world, but on a kind of injury prevention side of it. And he was just like, you don't need those shoes and they will injure you because you are frail. Essentially. I want to keep the the hate going now. And I mean, maybe this is one for me more in the YouTube side of things, where you see creators like Marques Brownlee and that in the tech world getting really early access to product. We just don't. If we want to make a video and, you know, give you all at home a really good idea about whether that thing is worth buying, especially come embargo day, we just can't do it because we're, you know, in some cases getting just basic information about these products 2-3 days before they launch, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, it can be tricky. And of course, like every brand has a marketing team who deals with, you know, the various media outlets, whether it be us, you know, GCN, Cycling News, Escape Collective, Velo, blah, blah, blah. And of course, like, you know, we all have to have relationships with these people in order to get access to the products. Now, you know, we are an upstanding media organization, and we always try and be fair to both, obviously, you know, the brand who have sent us a product to test, but also, you know, to our audience, who obviously are our ultimate priority. But it is tricky. Like, you know, I'm sure there are other places out there who, you know, have different models and they can maintain relationships. And obviously, like, you know, if they've got a bigger audience than us, they're probably going to get preferential treatment when it comes to receiving like a product that's in limited quantity and availability. And of course, it's harder to ship a bike around the world than it is to ship a new iPhone or whatever. You know, I'm sure there may be, Marques Brownlee can get the new iPhone 16 Pro Max, whatever. But like, there's probably a smaller tech YouTuber out there who's making the same complaint as us. I think it's like, we'd always want more time. I guess, you know, it kind of comes back to the point. I think that like most bike brands are like small, and so they're kind of working with small teams of people trying to get, you know, they're also trying to get bikes to bike shops at the same time as they're trying to things to us or whatever, and there's probably a lot of people asking him questions. But yeah, it would be great to get more lead time on this stuff, but I don't see it changing.
Well, and I suppose they want maximum reach, maximum bang for their buck, so they're going to put it out to as many outlets as possible. And also the risk with sending stuff to us, alluding to your point, is that there could be an element of criticism, which is going to be harder to sell it rather than sending it to potentially like some kind of influencer or something like that, which is a relatively new thing we're up against and has changed quite a bit over the last few years. Gone, I think, are the days of full exclusives when it was purely just the magazine world. You know, if we had a big enough subscriber base or, you know, newsstand sales, you could quite easily secure those, but it wasn't all sort of pivotal on 12, 24 hours. You know, it was like you'd have it for a month before anyone else. And it was a bit different. Now I think with the way in which it all works, I suppose the marketing teams just want to put it out there to as many folk as they possibly can, and they will be looking at numbers, and numbers of the folk that aren't necessarily going to give a negative review potentially
maybe
is going to mean that they'll probably go down that route first, which is a shame because it feels like we still offer something really valuable, and it would be great to get more exclusive stuff or just have those products for longer if we possibly could, because then we can do a better job.
I think the flip side of this is a positive for everyone at home, is that there are so many creators out there. And again, from a YouTube point of view, I'm talking like NorCal, AeroCoach, Dylan Johnson, doing some fantastic testing of products that, you know, you and I can all buy, and making stuff and making that information really easy to understand and digest. And the likes of DC Rainmaker, GP Llama, Shane Miller, doing really in-depth reviews. And, you know, those two guys are getting, especially cycling tech, quite a bit ahead of us. But I can see why the brands send it to them. Totally. Like, they're doing really, really good work. So for you guys at home, it's like really fantastic time to be tuned into cycling.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I, kind of one of the reasons I got into this world is like before, obviously, I had a job in the bike industry. I was just a guy who was into reading websites like BikeRadar and going on this sort of stuff. And I think one of the big things in the last few years has been the kind of like explosion of available like proper testing data from the likes of, bicyclerollingresistance.com is really good. The guys at AeroCoach, like they do a lot of like tire testing and rolling resistance testing and things like that, and they just kind of give that data away for free. As you say, like, you kind of quoted like people like YouTubers like Dylan Johnson or DC Rainmaker, like these guys do a lot of testing and then they just kind of make that content available for free. I think there's a kind of really hyper engaged kind of community in cycling that's really interested in the kind of like tech side of it, and obviously, like, if you're coming at it from a training perspective or a fitness thing, like there are many, I'm sure there are other creators in that space who can provide those things, but I do appreciate that there is a kind of like openness to kind of sharing data and like just like doing it for the kind of like the love of the sport and like wanting to improve and as you say, like make things better rather than, not everything's behind a paywall, at least not yet.
Wow. The same, I think we can really say of access to the pros. Rob, you guys have been doing some like a lot of vodcasts and stuff with pro riders and personalities within the mountain biking world, and they're all like nice people.
They are indeed. Yeah, I think mountain biking is smaller than road cycling. The top riders are probably paid quite a lot of money, but I don't think it's anywhere near in the same sort of league as the top road racers.
You mean they're not matching Remco's €10 million contract offer?
No, they definitely won't be doing that. But on the flip side, I think, it means that they're generally just easier to access. When you speak to those guys, they're more just everyday. They're not, well, I'm sort of, maybe I'm speaking out of turn. I don't know how it works on the roadside specifically, but The mountain bikers are more likely to be at the events that more people are at, general public. They might be at a national event and you're going to see more of those guys. You'll be able to interact with more of them. They're not, they're not the same level of stardom, I suppose, as the road riders are, which just means if we need to pick up the phone to one of them, we can. We're not going through multiple agents or team managers and stuff like that. Maybe in some cases we have to, but generally speaking, it's a pretty much direct line to those guys, and it's that bit easier.
That's just because you're a big deal, Rob.
That's really not. It really is.
I would say that road riders are still like mostly really friendly people. I'd say that the women's side of the sport are generally happier. From my limited experience of interviewing riders, they're generally happier to chat to you about more techie things. But even I got to interview Mathieu van der Poel at the start of the Gravel Worlds, which I didn't record because the camera didn't record.
Yeah, that's why no one's ever seen it. But it did happen. Yeah.
I'll never live it down, but especially if I keep telling people.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was super, super friendly, super chatty about his bike. It's just that I think more times we have to go through a press officer.
Yeah, they have higher profile. I mean, my experience from kind of like going to the tour the last few years, and obviously we don't really focus on the athletes, we focus on the kind of bike tech here at BikeRadar. But generally, like even at the Tour de France, which is the most like high pressure environment for professional road cyclists, as kind of bike media, we're still just basically allowed free reign, within reason, to kind of like walk around the buses, look at stuff, see what's going on, ask the mechanics questions. Like for example, like this year's tour, we went to the Astana team hotel because we wanted to see Cav's bike, and we were just able to walk around in between the buses, check out Mark's bike,
sleep in the beds.
Yeah, well, but like everyone was going around doing their jobs. Mechanics were fettling with things. Cavendish and his teammates were walking between the team hotel and the team bus. I think there's a kind of like implicit agreement there that as long as you don't get in the way, they're happy to provide you that kind of access. And it was genuinely really good. And then likewise, if you're a fan, the fans were turning up outside the hotel, and the riders were more than happy to kind of like stop and sign autographs and have selfies with people.
There's probably more pressure on their time as well.
100%.
Mountain biking.
Yeah.
Everyone knows the Tour de France. It doesn't matter whether you ride a bike or not. Everyone knows what it is.
Yeah.
I don't think you could say the same for downhill mountain biking.
No, exactly. But there were other journalists there at the same time. We were photographing Cav's bike, for example, and they were really, they were able to just stop Mark whilst he was walking from the hotel to the bus and just ask him a few questions. And I can't imagine that you could, there's no way you're going to be allowed into that kind of like inner sanctum at a Premier League football match or whatever. So absolutely. Yeah, it's cool.
So from some of the good stuff, I want to go back to some of the bad stuff, and this one really is going to maybe divide opinion in the comments because it's some of the stuff that you might think is really, really good. And I want to start with some of the travel stuff. We get to go and ride bikes in some of the nicest places in the world, and it sounds like a dream, but it can become a drag on time, especially with travel days, especially if a press trip is quite long. And a lot of the time, the places that the press kind of take you to test out a new bike and see a new bike is not exactly the most testing environments. So I think it's bad for the environment a lot of the time, and it doesn't necessarily bring you the best content that we could produce if it was sent to us on trails and roads that we know.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, this, because obviously, it is a privilege to be able to go on a kind of, a nice cycling trip to somewhere. But obviously, we still have to, we've got work to do. We have to, as you say, file a review of the bike or whatever, create content, all of that stuff. I think, we could always say no to these product launches. That is something that, I think road.cc has done recently, for example, and I can respect that decision. I think that's a perfectly legitimate stance to take. Obviously, the problem is we're saying no to these launches is that the brand is unlikely to just send you the bike anyway, so it's kind of like you can come and, test it under our kind of supervision where we want you to, or you can just not have the bike. And so there is a kind of there's a tough one there. For example, earlier this year, I went on a Canyon Aero launch. and it was fantastic, a really lovely experience. Got to go to Calpe in Spain, and do some really like lovely rides in the absolute blazing heat. It was far too hot for me. I was absolutely roasting. And that was fantastic, and it's a great experience, and really lucky to be able to go on that. But yeah, it doesn't it's not a huge test of the bike, because the roads there are really, really lovely.
Yeah.
They're really traffic free, and that's more of a test of my capabilities as a rider than
just
necessarily
endure the heat.
Yeah, exactly, to just endure the heat than necessarily test the bike. But you can understand why they want to kind of control the narrative to a certain extent, because that tire comes the bike that I was riding came spec'd with a 25mm tire on the front, for example, which is very narrow by today's standards. And I think around the kind of broken back roads of South Bristol, that would have become very obviously a bit of a low point on that bike. But obviously when you're riding it out in Spain and the roads are really good, it doesn't really make any difference. So it kind of makes it harder to criticize, but I can completely understand why they would want to do it.
I don't know if this is a problem in the mountain bike world, because every time I hear that you guys are going on a trip, it's to Wales.
We just go there a lot anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, we're really close, aren't we? So it's just a hop over the bridge. Well, drive, obviously.
Take your passport.
Well,
foreign
always,
travel.
but yeah. I think in Brand's defence, I think especially after COVID, where everything was remote, ideally, if we want to produce a review, having the bikes here with us makes a lot of sense. I still feel though there's a time and a place for launches, and I think that genuinely are really important, because you have that focus time, either with the bike or with the brand managers or with the engineers, whoever it might be. I think we were at risk of losing that by trying to make everything remote, because then stuff just sort of falls into your weekly schedule. It's another thing on top. You don't have maybe the same concentration levels or focus you need if it's something that's super important. So I think, being able to dedicate 2-3 days, go somewhere that's going to be good to ride that bike means a lot. Simon's right in the sense that it's harder to then produce something really meaningful in terms of a review. But it's trying to weigh those things up, and I think it's picking and choosing the right ones for us for the most part, but being open all ears and making sure when brands come to us, we try to weigh up those options and try to work it out. Most of the launches now are really good. I don't think I've been on a bad one for a long, long time, and there have been some absolute howlers in the past.
Do you want to go into details, story time?
Well, it makes it sound like I'm really ungrateful. Obviously, got to go to some really cool places, but I did do one where we were flown out and told the first day. I think I left at 3 a.m. and we were told it was a rest day when we got there. So we had nothing to do. There's no internet, and we were on deadline for the magazine, so I couldn't really contribute to the guys here, which made life. Well, I wasn't very popular, put it like that. Then we didn't have access to the bikes. Then we got access to the bikes, and they were ex-demo bikes that were falling apart, just genuinely falling apart. Then we went riding, and I don't think they'd really scouted the route out particularly well. And we did a climb for I don't know how long. And then we were told that the descent was too dangerous. And we had to ride down the fire road. No, not even a fire road. Sorry, a main road. We rode down a main road, and that was us done. And then we had another day after that doing nothing, and then we flew home. There was one guy who asked to have his flights changed and was adamant he would leave. I think he paid his own way in the end. Wow. Yeah. So long gone are those days. Everything's pretty dialed now in terms of what we do, where we go, all of those things. And I'm eternally grateful that we've had so many opportunities to go to so many cool places and do so many things. But Simon's right in the sense that we are super busy. I'm not complaining. But it is a thing that we do need to sort of weigh up. So it can get tricky. And there are a lot of brands, and there's not many of us.
My worst one was a premier class hotel room on the Dauphiné a few years ago that was 36 degrees inside the room, and communal toilets and communal showers, and that was an experience that I never want to repeat.
I do think Rob's right though, that you, like, as you say, they're kind of like that COVID time when like everything was remote, and you know everyone sent the bikes to us and we just kind of rode them around on our own. Like, that is good, you know, for certain things. You can ride it on your own roads with places you're familiar with, but actually, like, on launches you do get to meet people that you wouldn't have otherwise. Like on the Canyon trip, for example, I met a guy called Lucas Beer, who was one of Canyon's lead design engineers. Actually did there's a podcast segment in with one of the old BikeRadar podcast episodes, and I got to really ask him, you know, critical questions about the bike that I wouldn't have been able to, because I didn't even know he existed. I wouldn't have been able to say, had Canyon just sent me the bike, oh, can I talk to Lucas? Because until I done that trip, I didn't know he existed. So there are, you know, obviously meeting in person is always good, and you know, you can't always plan for that. Like, those are kind of like serendipitous, basically. So they can be good, and I think, like, yeah, as Rob says, you know, we are lucky to get to attend those things, but yeah.
And it does circle back to that first positive we said about, you know, about how nice all the people in the industry are. So actually getting to spend some time with them is really fun. It's really cool. So we've sort of turned that negative into a positive.
Yeah, one last one that's sometimes a negative for us, and I think it's a negative for people reading reviews, but it will definitely be seen as an absolute bike industry moan, is that brands always send us the most expensive version of a bike. And I want to explain this. Actually, no, Simon, can you explain this one? Because you review a lot more bikes than me these days.
Well, I mean, yeah, so brands do typically want to send the kind of flagship model, you know, so the one with the best wheels, the best tires, the best group set. You know, I haven't asked them why, but we always, basically, when we're calling in a new bike, you know, or, you know, say, you know, Trek or Specialized get in touch with us and they say, we've got this new model coming, we always request a kind of mid-range model, and inevitably they always want to send us the top spec. And I think it's just because the top spec model is much harder to criticize. You know, I can't say that the tires need upgrading if the tires are really good. I can't say that the wheel set is, you know, a little bit heavy if it's a top end wheel set. Like, and obviously, you know, we can say, well, this bike's very expensive, and that's a negative. But obviously value is subjective, and if it's kind of like, if the price of that bike is roughly in line with what it would cost you to get an equivalent spec bike from another brand, then I can't say that it's bad value per se, because you couldn't get that elsewhere for less. It just, that the cost is what it is, and whether or not someone should buy that bike is basically an individual decision. I can't just say, well, just because a bike costs 14 grand it is therefore bad, because that's just not true. Like, some people have loads of money to spend and they want to buy a really nice bike, and there's just nothing wrong with that. I'm not one of those people, but yeah, so that's
He's got his
I spend all my money on hair conditioner these days, Liam.
Oh, really?
There you go.
Rob, are you buying hair conditioner, or are you buying really, really nice bikes? Neither.
Yeah, neither. Yeah.
Rob's got too many children.
2. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, all those kids.
One more than you.
Kids are very expensive.
They are.
Is the mountain bike world kind of similar?
Yeah, to a degree. And I think a good example would be that. So on the launch of the new Stump Jumper 15, I rode the Pro model, which is kind of second down from the S-Works, so the top model. And then when I got back, I reviewed the S-Works model, and my main criticism was, for like $2,500 you could save and get almost the same sort of ride feel.
Yeah,
the parts were more or less the same, maybe a couple of little bits here and there downgraded. So if anything, it would have been more beneficial just to send me the same bike or a lower spec one rather than that top model. But yeah, you know, in terms of what people are spending their money on, it's probably going to be those more mid-range bikes. I think in mountain biking now, most people are going to be buying sort of entry-level to mid-range stuff. Maybe they're like probably the bottom end of mid-range, and then from there on, and that's just sort of non-assist bikes. From there on, it's e-bikes, which are hugely expensive generally, you know, when you add the motor and the battery and everything. And then the whole thing is skewed a little bit just because the jump is quite vast. But I would say the bulk of people are probably more interested in that sort of everyday price. I say everyday price is still ridiculous, isn't it? Still huge amounts of money. But yeah, I think it makes more sense for us to be looking at that lower price point for sure.
I want to end on a really positive note. And I think it's something that road and mountain bike worlds can really agree on these days. It is genuinely quite difficult to buy a really bad bike. Like most bikes out there now, even around the £4,000 mark, which apparently is entry level these days,
is it? What on road?
It isn't.
Oh, come on! Like $4,000 is what you're getting for disc
I've
brakes.
never brought a £4,000 bike. No, you can get a bike for less than that, but it depends what you class. I mean, if you wanted electronic gears, yeah, you'd probably be looking at $3,000 to $4,000. But I don't think we would class that as. I wouldn't class that as. I mean, I bloody hope not.
I'm exposing myself as real bougie, aren't I? Now?
It depends. Well, yeah, it depends. Obviously, like what you're willing to put up with. If you don't mind mechanical gears, you can get a much cheaper bike.
Let's take this away from me being far too bougie in my bike choices and go back to the fact that it's hard to buy an actual bad one.
Yeah, I think so. I think the kind of like general level of bikes, as long as you're kind of buying from a brand name that you would recognize, is generally quite. It's generally quite high these days. It's hard to get a real stinker, and that may be partly explained by the fact that brands are kind of trying fewer things these days. Most of the kind of design choices, most road bikes look very similar, right? They're a kind of mix of lightweight and aerodynamics. You probably see D-shaped tubes here and there, carbon fiber or aluminium most likely, or steel, titanium if you fancy something different. But like generally road bikes are a kind of mature technology, and whilst we've seen things like 12-speed group sets coming along, the kind of functionality of the latest, Shimano 12-speed group sets isn't really any different to the ones that were 11-speed. That we took bigger steps with group sets when you went from things kind of like cables that were like external from the shifters, for example, but now everything's like they're kind of like fiddling with the ergonomics slightly, but functionally most things are pretty similar. I think the kind of the introduction of hydraulic disc brakes has really, like not everyone will like necessarily agree with this, but I think it has been good in the sense that like if you buy hydraulic disc brakes, the braking is really, really good. Whereas there was a chance like 10 years ago, if you brought a set of carbon wheels that were for rim brakes, it was like a lottery whether they actually like slowed you down.
We were talking about this earlier, and we were reminiscing about Bontrager's attempt to not build up heat, which was to use cork pads, which just didn't develop any friction, so you didn't slow down. It was great.
Yeah, so a lot of people had a lot of creative solutions to the kind of rim braking on carbon wheels, and it just wasn't a good idea, really. But like nowadays, you just don't have to worry about that. If you've got hydraulic disc brakes, you might get servo wave technology if you go up to Ultegra Di2 or Dura-Ace Di2. But in reality, if you brought Shimano Tiagra hydraulic disc brakes, they're going to slow you down basically just as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Gents, thank you so much for joining me. I think this was a largely positive discussion, and we actually like our jobs in the bike industry.
Can I throw in a wild card though, Liam? Because you didn't give me the opportunity to talk about the thing that really grinds my gears, and that is like vague and unsubstantiated claims from bike brands. And like it is tricky because we all want brands to say, well, how much better is this? Is it X watts better? But then when they give us that, often I go, well, how was that measured and at what speed and for who and whatever? But like, there was a great. My prime example is when Specialized launched its Airez shoe a few years ago, back when Sam Bennett had just kind of won the green jersey at the Tour, and they said that this shoe, just the shoe alone, offered a 7-watt increase in power and would make you 14 seconds faster over 10 kilometers.
Wow!
But they didn't.
But they didn't say it. But they didn't say how.
I wish.
We are, and obviously we go back and say, oh, that's really amazing. That must be an incredible pair of shoes.
No, they were just shoes that got real dirty real quick.
Well, yeah, but and obviously, basically, they wouldn't tell us how they'd sort of tested that. I'm sure they didn't just pluck that number out of thin air. That must have come from somewhere. But kind of like what's annoying about it is that them kind of saying that, but they're not kind of giving it any context. However, but it's weird because it comes from Specialized, who have that they had their YouTube series with like the wind tunnel, for example, where they kind of shared a lot of data and they showed how they're doing it. And I'm sure in other contexts they probably have given claims that they have substantiated. But yeah, and I don't want to just call out Specialized, because they're certainly not the only brand that does this.
My favourite this year was Trek with the new Madone, when they were just like, oh yeah, we've made it basically the Amonda, but it's most definitely just as fast as the old bike. And you're going, are you sure? Like, this must be quite clever. And then they said, oh yeah, as long as you use the new very, very sculpted aero water bottles. Yeah.
Which they didn't test on the old bike. That's a really good one, where it's kind of that's not like a vague or unsubstantiated claim, because they did give us the details on there, but that's the kind of more of a thing of not comparing apples to apples. So they tested the old bike with round bottles and just normal bottle cages, but then they tested the new bike with the aero bottles and the aero bottle cages. Now, there's nothing stopping. The bottle mounts are the same. There's nothing stopping you from putting the new aero bottles on the old bike. And so they're kind of like, they weren't lying. The new bike, I suppose, was likely, according to the wind tunnel results, as fast as the old one in the setup that they tested it. But I would argue that that's a kind of unfair way to test the old bike, when you could quite, for the cost of the aero bottles, you could presumably make it faster.
My favourite is any brand that just basically says it's faster. Just trust us.
We often get that with tyres, don't we? This new tyre is 10% faster than the old one, but we don't know how fast the old one was.
You've got to trust them, Simon.
We don't know how fast the old one was, and it's like, what does 10% mean in terms of whatever? Like, are you talking just rolling resistance? Are you, and now in the days where we've got aero tyres, are we talking like combined? Is it 10% faster, 10% lower rolling resistance? Like, is it slightly more aero? Like, it's a real minefield.
So obviously, Rob, we've got all the data on the road to kind of
mountain
really
bikers love their data. You've got tyre pressure sensors, suspension. You love a graph.
Do you get like sendiness? Is that a metric in mountain
Sadly
bike?
not, no. Are they guys
Squishiness?
Do measure now how far you jump?
Really?
Usability?
Yeah, your air time. Yeah, I don't know if we trust it, but so yeah, on that Specialized, to be fair to them, the last launch I did, they had a load of data, graphs, everything to back up what they were saying, and basically just all the reasoning as to why they'd built a shock that they built. I mean, you could drill down into the detail, but they had the engineers on hand, and those guys, you could quiz them and they'd come back with some really sort of robust answers. So I feel like it isn't sort of a bold claim with nothing to back it up. From my experience, it's generally there's always something behind it, and they're always willing to kind of divulge that information, which is always really nice.
Well, there you go. There's a kind of no.
Rob asks nicely, whereas I go back with a
snotty
answer. Snotty email that they ignore.
I wanted to go back to the positive we had before about all the good bikes.
Yeah,
maybe it's the friends we made along the way.
Who knows? But I think
that was a great video.
From my side, what's amazing now is how good the entry-level stuff is. So we've said about how you can't really get a bad bike anymore. Most importantly, you can't get a really bad entry-level bike anymore. Or maybe there's a couple here and there, but it isn't like it used to be. So you could spend, compared to some of the higher-end stuff, a relatively small amount of money and actually get a decent experience mountain biking. Whereas I think 10, 15 years ago, if you spent under 500 quid, no hope. You just have 2 flat tires and a chain wrapped around your leg. Whereas now, you can go in and go somewhere like, I don't know, Go Outdoors or whatever the equivalent is in the US, and you can get a cheapish mountain bike and go onto the trails and experience mountain biking firsthand. And it's brilliant, and it won't put people off.
Is that from like one buy? Is it from suspension tech? Is it from, say, geometry? Is it
all of those things? And I think there was a point, definitely since I've been doing this, where there was a huge amount of focus on performance and the top end stuff, and then they realized that people coming into the sport were really struggling to buy a bike that was going to work properly, and so a lot of that trickled down and was reinvested into that lower end. So all of a sudden you've got a full suspension mountain bike that costs £1,000 that has genuinely good tires on there, suspension that you can adjust, so it isn't just, you know, this is what you buy at the shop. It isn't going to work that well if you're this heavy or this light. Maybe if you're in the middle it might be okay. The brakes and the chain's going to fall off. Whereas now you can go out there and there's incredible bikes for £1,000 that you will have a blast ride in, but there's also incredible bikes at 500 quid and less than that, which are going to be really, really good. So for me, that's one of the biggest positives. So aside from the people, it's just how good it's all got. Like when I started downhill racing, my main problems were stopping and my chain falling off, which you still feel like, you know, shouldn't be.
Two
you know?
quite crucial things.
Yeah, relative. Yeah, when you're thinking about riding downhill. So, you know, we've kind of nailed all of that stuff at the top end, and it's got way, way better at the bottom. Like genuinely much better. So in that sense, we're leaving on a really positive note, I think.
I think that's going to get better in the road side of things too. I think the switch to hydraulic disc brakes in the last, you know, sort of 5 or 10 years has seen a kind of real focus on that higher end stuff. And then the kind of lower end stuff has been little bit left behind. You know, like anything below Tiagra for the roadside is still not hydraulic disc brakes, but with the kind of like launch of drop bar Qs from Shimano Qs, which you did a video on recently, Liam, if I'm right. Yeah, so we'll put a link in the description to that video if you want to find out more about that. But I think that's basically going to bring drop bar hydraulic disc brake group sets to even lower price points than ever before, and hopefully kind of get a bit of parity. Because when I've looked at, you know, buying an entry level XC mountain bike, for example, in the past, I've been astonished at how, you know, you can get 12 speed hydraulic disc brakes like for under £1,000 on, and, you know, like you say, like a decent spec. And at the moment that's still not possible with road bikes really, but I think it's going to come soon.
And you could probably upgrade it because the standards have got better.
Yeah.
God, this industry's so good.
It's all good news. And I think, gents, after that bonus one, we will now leave it there.
Wait, one more.
Oh, God, don't do that to me. I want my lunch.
Does he. I can hear his tummy.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I don't eat, Rob. That's why I'm so skinny.
Yeah.
You just have to put up with it.
Don't follow Simon's advice. Go eat your lunch as we're going to. Now, gents, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Liam.
Thank you very much for watching this episode of the BikeRadar podcast. If you want to see more, click up there or up there.